The Hidden Wounds. A story of sacrifice and community. What if I told you that the person sleeping next to you could be harboring a secret so devastating that it would change everything you thought you knew about love, sacrifice, and survival? What if that secret was literally eating them alive from the inside out, one mysterious wound at a time? Tonight, I'm going to share with you a story that will make you question everything you think you know about the cost of service, the weight of guilt, and the incredible power of a community that refuses to give up on its own. This isn't just another feel-good tale about helping the homeless. This is about a man who built a sanctuary for others while his own body was betraying him in the most horrifying way imaginable. By the time this story ends, you'll understand why sometimes the people who seem the strongest are actually fighting the hardest battles, and why the most beautiful endings often rise from the most devastating beginnings. Picture this scene. It's 3 a.m. in a quiet bedroom in the small town of Oakwood. The kind of peaceful silence that most married couples take for granted. But tonight, that silence is broken by the sound of frantic scratching. Not from a pet, not from a tree branch against the window, but from a grown man desperately clawing at his own skin. Ethan Mitchell jolts awake, his fingers already working furiously at the back of his arm. In the dim glow of their bedside clock, his wife Rebecca stirs beside him. She's a nurse, trained to wake at the slightest sign of distress, and what she sees in the pale light makes her stomach drop. "Those marks again," she whispers, reaching for the lamp. But what the light reveals isn't just concerning. It's terrifying. For 3 solid weeks, Ethan's skin has been erupting in angry red welts that appear overnight like some kind of biblical plague. These aren't ordinary bug bites. They're arranged in perfect clusters, raised and inflamed, resisting every treatment they've tried. The local exterminator found nothing. The dermatologist was baffled. Every morning brought fresh evidence that something was very, very wrong. But here's what makes this story even more compelling. Ethan Mitchell isn't just any guy dealing with a mysterious skin condition. He's a 35-year-old Army veteran who returned from 3 tours of duty with gentle blue eyes and prematurely gray temples, carrying invisible wounds that would eventually manifest in ways no one could have predicted. 2 years earlier, when the steel plant that had been Oakwood's economic heartbeat suddenly collapsed, Ethan watched his hometown transform almost overnight. Main Street, once bustling with life, became a ghost town of boarded-up shops. But what broke Ethan's heart wasn't the empty storefronts. It was the growing encampments of homeless people that began sprouting up around town like painful reminders of how quickly stability could crumble. Most people looked the other way. Most people complained about property values and safety concerns. But Ethan couldn't ignore what he saw, because he'd already lived through the ultimate consequence of a community that turns its back on its vulnerable members. 6 months before those mysterious bites appeared, Ethan had done something that made him a local hero to some and a controversial figure to others. He'd converted an abandoned factory on Pine Street into a makeshift shelter. Not because he was particularly wealthy or particularly religious, but because he carried a 2-inch scar on his forearm and a much deeper scar on his soul. That physical scar came from shrapnel during his final deployment. But the emotional scar? That came from finding his older brother James too late. James had been a fellow veteran who returned from combat only to spiral into homelessness and addiction. By the time Ethan found him in a hospital bed, pneumonia had already set in. James died alone, forgotten by a system that had used him up and discarded him. At the funeral, Ethan made a promise that would define the rest of his life. "Never again," he whispered to his brother's casket. "Not in our hometown." So when the steel plant closed and Oakwood's homeless population exploded, Ethan saw it as his chance to honor that promise. Using his own savings and whatever donations he could scrape together, he transformed that abandoned warehouse into something precious. Not just a place to sleep, but a place where dignity survived despite circumstances. The shelter wasn't much to look at. Cots separated by hanging sheets, a communal kitchen, 2 shower stalls. But it housed 23 people who had nowhere else to go. People like Harold Williams, a 70-year-old Vietnam veteran who had been living in his car. People like Sarah Henderson and her 8-year-old daughter Lucy, who had arrived 3 months earlier with nothing but a duffel bag and bruises that told their story without words. Lucy had become Ethan's shadow at the shelter. Every morning, he'd stand in the doorway watching residents leave for job interviews or addiction meetings, hoping that today would be their turning point. Just like James never had. Rebecca, Ethan's wife and a registered nurse at the local hospital, had initially opposed the shelter project. You can't save everyone, she'd argued. But after witnessing Ethan's unwavering commitment, her heart had softened. Now she volunteered weekends, providing basic medical care to residents. But by early October, something sinister was happening to the man who had dedicated his life to saving others. It started small. A single bite on a Tuesday morning while Ethan was showering. Just a small angry welt on his forearm that itched constantly. He dismissed it as a mosquito bite, even though the October weather was too cold for mosquitoes. By Thursday, 3 more had appeared on his neck. Rebecca's maternal instincts kicked in the moment she saw them at dinner. "These look like insect bites," she murmured, pushing aside his collar to examine the marks more closely. Her professional training made her notice details others might miss. The clustered pattern, the raised welts, the way they seemed to burn rather than just itch. "Have you changed laundry detergent recently?" she asked. "Or could it be something at the shelter?" Ethan shrugged, unconsciously scratching at his neck. "Nothing's changed. But the shelter did take in some donations last week. Second-hand coats and winter blankets. Maybe it came from there." Rebecca's eyes widened with sudden understanding. "Bed bugs," she said firmly. "They're notoriously difficult to detect and easily transported on clothing and furniture. It has to be that." The weekend turned into a whirlwind of activity. Rebecca called her contact Sandra, who worked for a pest control company. Saturday morning, Sandra and her team arrived, stripped every bed, vacuumed every inch of their small 2-bedroom house, and inspected furniture crevices and mattress seams with practiced efficiency. After 2 hours of meticulous inspection, Sandra delivered her verdict. "I don't see any evidence of infestation," she announced, noting the absence of casings, droppings, or actual bugs. "But since they're sneaky little devils, we should treat anyway as a precaution. And we need to inspect the shelter." The chemical smell lingered for days, but by Wednesday, 5 fresh bites had appeared across Ethan's shoulders, burning and itching so intensely that they kept him awake at night. The Pine Street shelter investigation proved even more disturbing. "If they're not here, they must be there," Rebecca argued over breakfast, watching her husband scratch until tiny beads of blood appeared on his skin. The rumor of a bed-bug infestation created a crisis that forced residents to temporarily relocate to the community center while Sandra's crew inspected every donated piece of furniture, every cot, every possible hiding place. Harold, using the nickname he'd given Ethan despite his medical background rather than military officer status, asked, "You doing okay, Captain?" The older veteran stood beside him, watching the inspection crew work. Little Lucy tugged at Ethan's hand, her voice smaller than usual with fear. "Mr. Ethan, are the bugs going to make us leave forever?" "I'm fine, just frustrated," Ethan replied, involuntarily rubbing a fresh cluster of bites on his wrist. "Not a chance, sweetie. We're just making sure everyone stays healthy." But the inspection revealed nothing definitive. Sandra recommended prophylactic treatment regardless, an expensive but necessary precaution that severely depleted the shelter's meager emergency fund. Here's where this story takes a truly disturbing turn. After 2 weeks of treatment, despite every intervention they tried, the bites continued to appear. But they were only appearing on Ethan. Each morning brought new clusters, and the discomfort and inflammation were getting worse. Rebecca, with her clinical training, started documenting them with photographs, tracking their pattern and progression with medical precision. One evening, she compared photos taken on different days. "This doesn't make sense," she said, her voice carrying the frustration of a medical professional facing a puzzle she couldn't solve. "If it's bed bugs, I should have bites too. We sleep in the same bed. And why aren't any of the shelter residents affected?" Ethan grimaced as he applied calamine lotion to a particularly angry cluster on his neck. "Maybe I'm just extra tasty," he joked weakly. Rebecca didn't smile. "I think you should see Dr. Anderson." "For bug bites? He'll think we're nuts." "Not for bug bites," Rebecca corrected. "For an unexplained skin reaction that's getting worse despite treatment." Meanwhile, the shelter was facing an even more pressing crisis. The health department had received anonymous complaints about unsanitary conditions and was threatening an inspection. If they found any reason to shut down operations, 23 people would be back on the streets as winter approached. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Rebecca warned, finding Ethan asleep at the kitchen table one morning, shelter paperwork spread around him. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and noticed with alarm how he flinched at her touch. He was working late into every night, cleaning floors, organizing donated supplies, updating resident records, all while battling the relentless itch that kept him awake and distracted. "The people at the shelter have nowhere else to go," Ethan said simply, straightening his papers and reaching for his coffee. "I can handle a few insect bites." Rebecca pulled down his collar and gasped at the angry constellation of welts spreading across his upper back. No matter how chaotic the week became, the Mitchells had made Saturday night sacred. 2 hours together, an old movie, homemade popcorn. This tradition had kept their marriage strong through deployments, night shifts, and now the all-consuming shelter project. "You picked last week, so tonight we're watching Roman Holiday," Rebecca said as she scrolled through their movie library. "No complaints about Audrey Hepburn," Ethan forced a weary smile. "No complaints here." Halfway through the film, Ethan's head rested in Rebecca's lap, his eyes heavy with the fatigue that seemed to be his constant companion lately. The health department inspection had gone reasonably well, though they'd left a list of recommended improvements that would stretch their already thin budget. Rebecca stroked his hair absently, her attention split between Audrey Hepburn's romantic adventure and her husband's predicament. Her fingers traced gentle patterns across his scalp, an unconsciously comforting gesture she had performed countless times before. And then her hand froze. Carefully parting his dark hair, she leaned closer. "Hold still for a second," she whispered. "What is it?" Ethan murmured, half asleep. Rebecca didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her phone and turned on its flashlight. What she saw in that harsh LED glare made her blood run cold. The circular lesion was almost 2 centimeters in diameter, with raised, inflamed edges. Unlike the previous bites, this one had actually broken through the skin, creating what looked like a tiny, perfect hole. "Oh God, no!" she screamed, jerking back involuntarily. Ethan sprang to his feet, fully awake now. "Rebecca, what's wrong?" "We're going to the hospital." Her voice was firm and unyielding. "This isn't bedbugs. This is something else entirely." That Saturday night, the emergency room at Oakwood Memorial was mercifully quiet. Dr. William Anderson, a silver-haired physician who had delivered half the town's children, carefully examined and photographed the numerous lesions on Ethan's body. "How long have you had these other lesions?" he asked. "About 3 weeks," Rebecca answered for her husband. "And this larger wound on his scalp. Any idea when this appeared?" Ethan shook his head carefully. "I didn't know it existed until Rebecca found it tonight." "We assumed these were bedbug bites," Rebecca added. Dr. Anderson's expression remained professionally neutral, but his eyes showed concern. He ordered a battery of tests, blood work, skin scrapings, even a small biopsy of the wound's edge. 3 hours later, Dr. Anderson returned with results, carefully closing the examination room door, which is never a good sign. "It's not bedbugs," he said without preamble. "Ethan, you have a rare inflammatory condition called pyoderma gangrenosum. It causes tissue necrosis. That means the tissue breaks down and dies. Without treatment, these wounds will continue to grow and worsen." Rebecca gripped Ethan's hand as the doctor continued. "The challenging part is determining what triggers it. It's often associated with underlying autoimmune conditions, and sometimes it can be triggered by physical trauma or exposure to certain chemicals." A shadow passed across Ethan's face. "I was in service, not chemical warfare." "Of course," Dr. Anderson nodded. "Have you been exposed to any unusual substances recently? Perhaps during your military service?" "We need to start aggressive treatment immediately," the doctor continued, "including corticosteroids, immunosuppressants, and specialized wound care. The condition is serious, but it's treatable with proper intervention. There's one more concern." He paused. "Have you noticed anything unusual cognitively? Some patients experience neurological symptoms. Memory problems, confusion, mood changes." Rebecca's head snapped up. She thought about how Ethan had been unusually tired, how he'd forgotten Harold's birthday last week despite planning a small celebration for days, then showing up empty-handed, claiming he'd never discussed it. "I'd like to schedule a neurological evaluation as part of your treatment plan," Dr. Anderson said. "We should monitor for cognitive abnormalities." The drive home was filled with silence, Rebecca's knuckles white on the steering wheel as Ethan stared out the passenger window at the darkened storefronts of Main Street. "This isn't about what you can handle, Ethan," Rebecca said, suddenly pulling the car over, tires crunching on gravel. "The shelter, the treatment, everything. This is serious." Her professional composure cracked, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Dr. Anderson didn't say it, but I know that condition can be fatal if left untreated. And what about these memory problems? What if—" She couldn't finish the question. Ethan reached for her hand. "I'm not going to forget you, Becca. Not you, not the shelter, not any of it." But even as he said it, they both knew that promises couldn't stop what was happening inside his body. Monday morning brought another crisis. Thomas Jenkins from the county health department arrived at the shelter unannounced, clipboard in hand. "We've received information about a potentially serious medical condition that may pose risks to shelter residents," he said, his bureaucratic tone at odds with the humans suffering all around him. "Who told you about my condition?" Ethan asked. "That's irrelevant. What matters is containment and prevention," Jenkins replied, adjusting his glasses. "We need to determine whether this facility can safely remain open while we investigate whether your condition presents a public health concern." Harold stepped forward, his weathered face indignant. "You want to shut us down because Ethan's sick? Where are we supposed to go?" "No decision has been made yet," Jenkins clarified, "but we need to consider all possibilities. In the meantime, I'll need to interview residents about any symptoms they may have experienced." As Jenkins made his rounds through the shelter, Ethan retreated to his small office, a converted supply closet. His head throbbed from mounting pressure, both from the lesions and the mounting crisis. His health, the shelter, Rebecca's worry were all building toward an inevitable catastrophe. A gentle knock interrupted his brooding. Rebecca stood in the doorway, her face drawn. "Dr. Anderson called," she said. "Your blood work shows some concerning patterns. He wants to make an immediate adjustment to your treatment plan." She hesitated, clearly considering her words carefully. "He asked about your deployment records. Your condition may be connected to chemical exposure." Ethan turned away, unable to meet her questioning gaze. Some things were better left buried, like the classified operation he'd been involved in during his second tour. But how long could he keep that secret when his body was betraying him, wound by mysterious wound? The treatment regimen Dr. Anderson prescribed was aggressive. High-dose corticosteroids made Ethan jittery, while immunosuppressants left him exhausted and vulnerable to every passing cold. Despite this, he insisted on maintaining his regular schedule at the shelter, with Rebecca now accompanying him most days, medical kit in hand. Every morning and evening, Rebecca meticulously cleaned Ethan's wounds, applying specialized ointments and fresh dressings. "You need to rest," she said one morning, watching him struggle to button his flannel shirt, his fingers clumsy with inflammation. "Let Harold handle things today. I need to be there when Jenkins returns for his follow-up inspection," Ethan insisted. Rebecca bit back her frustration, knowing that arguing would only drain his limited energy. Instead, she brought extra medication in her purse and helped him with the buttons. At the shelter, Lucy found Ethan immediately, holding up a colorful drawing. "Look what I made for you, Mr. Ethan." "That's beautiful, Lucy," Ethan said, crouching to examine her artwork, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his bandages. "It's you and me and Mommy and Harold and all the angels watching over us," she explained earnestly. "Who are all these people with wings?" Ethan asked. "The angels, silly. They watch over us when we sleep. This one looks just like you, but special," she said, pointing to a particularly large figure. "He watches over you." Later, as Lucy played with her mother, Rebecca approached Ethan. "You okay? You looked disturbed by her drawing." Ethan paused, rolling up the artwork carefully. "She drew an angel that looked like my brother James. Probably just a coincidence." Rebecca wasn't convinced, but she dropped the subject when Jenkins returned with his clipboard. "We've reviewed your medical reports, Mr. Mitchell," Jenkins said immediately upon arriving at Ethan's office. "While your condition isn't technically communicable, there are concerns about shared facilities and potential contamination vectors." The inspection proceeded smoothly, with Jenkins meticulously documenting every detail while maintaining a safe distance from Ethan. "You mean you're still looking for an excuse to shut us down?" Ethan asked bluntly. I'm just doing my job, Jenkins replied, handing over a multi-page document. Daily disinfection protocols, separate bathroom facilities for you, weekly professional cleaning service, all documented and verified. You can remain open for now, but with additional requirements. After Jenkins left, Rebecca squeezed Ethan's shoulder as he slumped in his chair, looking over the impossible list of requirements. This will bankrupt us within a month, he said. We'll figure something out. Maybe we can fundraise or... We already tried. Mayor Thompson made sure the town council denied our request for community development funds. He's wanted this place closed since day one. That night, Ethan slept on the couch, his voice unusually bitter. Among the medical correspondence and bills that had accumulated during their crisis, Rebecca found an appointment reminder card from Dr. Anderson's office, dated 3 weeks before the discovery of the scalp lesion. She stared at the card, her confusion turning to suspicion. She went to Ethan's desk, hesitated for barely a moment, then opened his calendar. There it was, an appointment with Dr. Anderson 6 weeks prior, then another 1-2 weeks later. Why would Ethan have appointments with Dr. Anderson before they knew about his condition? The implications were quickly processed by her nurse's brain. Ethan had been seeing the doctor long before they ended up in the ER. He had hidden from her the fact that he knew something was wrong. When Ethan woke up, Rebecca was sitting across from him on the coffee table, the appointment card between them. "Want to explain this?" she asked in a carefully neutral tone. Ethan looked at the card with resignation on his face. "How long have you known?" she asked. Ethan sat up, rubbing his face. "I saw the first lesion about 2 months ago. On my back, where I couldn't reach it easily. It was small then. I was going to tell you when." He trailed off. 2 months, Rebecca repeated, her voice sharp with betrayal. "And you've been seeing Dr. Anderson all along?" He didn't know what it was either. "I went once when the second lesion appeared. I hoped he was wrong. By the time the results indicated pyoderma, the bedbug theory was already in motion." "You lied to me for weeks," Rebecca said, the pain evident in her voice. "I turned our house upside down looking for bedbugs that weren't there. I'm sorry, Becca. I just couldn't handle another crisis. I needed time to process it." "What else aren't you telling me?" Rebecca stood, needing physical distance. "Is there anything from your service that could explain this?" A moment of fear and shame flashed across Ethan's face before he shook his head. "Nothing significant. Just normal field conditions. Occasional encounters with burn pits, nothing out of the ordinary." Rebecca wasn't convinced, but she recognized the wall he'd erected, the same one he'd built after returning from his last tour, when nightmares had tormented him for months. "I'm going to bed," she said finally. "Don't forget we have your neurological evaluation tomorrow." The pointed reminder hung heavy between them, laden with implication. An unexpected crisis arose the next morning. Harold appeared at their door as they were preparing to leave for the hospital, tension evident in his normally calm demeanor. "Sorry to bother you at home, but we've got a situation," Harold said, declining Rebecca's invitation to come inside. "Lucy's brother just showed up at the shelter." "I was surprised to learn Lucy had a brother," Rebecca replied. Harold nodded grimly. "None of us knew. He's just a kid, maybe 12, but apparently he's been living with his grandmother who passed away last week. The thing is, Ethan." He paused, lowering his voice. "His arms are marked. Like yours." Ethan and Rebecca exchanged looks of alarm. "Your appointment," Rebecca began. "Can wait. We'll be right there," Ethan finished, immediately grabbing his keys. "This can't wait." They found Sarah sitting on her cot, arms wrapped protectively around a small boy with Lucy's same wide brown eyes. Lucy hovered nearby, unusually quiet. "This is Michael," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "When I ran from his father, I had to leave my son with my mother." Without prompting, Michael held out his arm, revealing several small, round lesions that resembled Ethan's earlier ones. "They don't hurt much," he said, his stoicism far beyond his years. "Grandma said they were just spider bites." "Michael, how long have you had these?" Rebecca knelt to examine the marks, her professional manner masking her concern. "A few weeks, I think." Before Grandma got sick. Ethan drew Sarah aside while Rebecca gently questioned Michael. "Why didn't you tell us about him?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "His father had custody. My mother secretly kept me informed, but I wasn't even supposed to call. When she got sick..." She shook her head. "Michael ran away. Used money my mother left him to travel here on buses." "He needs medical attention, Sarah," Ethan said. "These marks look like mine, and it's not something to ignore." Fear lit up Sarah's face. "They'll question me if I take him to the hospital. His father might find us." Rebecca overheard and approached. "I know someone who can help discreetly. A pediatrician colleague who volunteers at the free clinic. Let me call her." Dr. Anderson answered Ethan's phone, concerned about why they had missed the appointment. "Something came up," Ethan explained, stepping outside for privacy. "A situation at the shelter." "These evaluations are crucial, Ethan." Dr. Anderson's concern was clear even over the phone. "Your latest blood work showed improvement, but you've been hinting at something serious with half-truths. We need to assess neurological function before." He paused. "Come in this afternoon, please. I need to know what we're dealing with. Bring Rebecca. Let's discuss this face-to-face." After arranging for Michael to see Rebecca's colleague, they headed to Dr. Anderson's office. "The lesions are progressing despite treatment," the doctor began without preamble, his usually composed features grim as he reviewed charts and photographs on his computer screen. "What's more concerning are these blood markers indicating neuroinflammation." He switched screens to display incomprehensible medical data. "The pattern is unusual but not unprecedented. I've consulted your case with several specialists." Rebecca stiffened. Meaning I've seen similar presentations in veterans from certain operational theaters," he said, looking directly at Ethan. "Situations where troops were exposed to specific chemical agents. During the Gulf War, soldiers who developed inflammatory conditions years later." "Many men served there," Ethan said, his expression remaining perfectly neutral. "Doesn't mean we were all exposed to something." Dr. Anderson removed his glasses, looking suddenly older. "Your condition is deteriorating, and the neurological symptoms could progress to permanent memory loss, cognitive impairment, personality changes. I can only help you if you're honest with me. If we know the specific agents involved, we can tailor treatment." Finally, Rebecca grabbed Ethan's hand as the silence stretched on, heavy with unspoken truths. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it together," she said. "But you have to tell us." Something broke in Ethan then. "There was an operation," he began reluctantly, "a dam breaking on years of carefully guarded memories. Classified. We were supporting a special forces team, providing medical assistance and clearing suspected chemical weapons facilities. One facility had been heavily damaged by local insurgents." "And you never reported this?" Rebecca's grip tightened on his hand. "We were exposed during the evacuation of wounded personnel. Tests were performed for acute effects, but nothing significant was found. The file was closed." Ethan's face hardened. "When James started showing unusual symptoms 2 years later, I tried to reopen the investigation. But no one was interested in connecting his homelessness, mental health issues, and possible chemical exposure." Dr. Anderson leaned forward. "Your brother James had similar lesions?" Ethan nodded slowly. "He was living under a bridge toward the end. Emergency room doctors thought it was just typical health problems of homeless people. Untreated wounds, poor hygiene. No one investigated further. The implications settled heavily on the room." "This changes our approach," Dr. Anderson said finally. "If James suffered from the same condition, undiagnosed and untreated." He turned to Rebecca. "There are experimental protocols that might help. I'll consult with specialists in veteran chemical exposure cases. And the shelter boy, Michael. His case might provide additional insight. Was his father also a veteran?" When they called Sarah, she confirmed that Michael's father had served in the same area as Ethan, but in a different unit. The following evening was Oakwood's monthly town council meeting, usually a routine affair dealing with local ordinances and zoning permits. But tonight, The community center was packed with Mayor Thompson's proposal to revoke the shelter's operating permit, drawing a record crowd. In the front row sat shelter residents: Harold in his worn Veterans Affairs cap, Rebecca with a folder of carefully prepared documentation, and Ethan, tense and pale, a bandage visible at his collar. Behind them sat Sarah holding Michael's hand, and Lucy clutching her latest drawing. Mayor Thompson, a heavy-set man with political ambitions beyond their small town, called the meeting to order. First item on our agenda: the proposed revocation of the Pine Street shelter's operating permit due to zoning violations and public health concerns. Jenkins from the Health Department gave a clinical presentation of his findings, outlining potential risks without specifically recommending closure. Following his conclusion, Mayor Thompson opened the floor for public comment. A series of property owners near the shelter complained about declining values and perceived safety issues, followed by local business owners expressing concerns about downtown's image as they tried to rebuild Main Street. When Ethan slowly walked to the podium to speak, his voice, though quiet, carried clearly through the hushed room. 3 years ago, after my military service, I returned to Oakwood. He began steadily and clearly, looking down at his prepared notes before purposefully setting them aside. My brother James lived and died on the streets of a bigger city because no one would help him. He addressed each complaint methodically with facts and figures, citing the mill closure's greater impact on property values than any social service facility, the documented benefits to local businesses from shelter staff purchases, and the fact that his condition was being treated and monitored. This shelter exists because I promised him it wouldn't happen here. Not in our hometown. Not to our neighbors. Rebecca followed with medical documentation and expert testimony. Harold spoke eloquently about the dignity the shelter had restored to his life. After Sarah shared how the shelter had saved her children from an abusive home, little Lucy approached the microphone, standing on tiptoe. "I drew you a picture, Mr. Mayor," she said, holding up her artwork showing stick figures outside what looked like the shelter. "This is my family now. If you close Mr. Ethan's house, where will my angels find us?" The crowd fell silent. "Thank you all for your passionate comments." Mayor Thompson cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "The council will now deliberate and vote." As council members conferred in whispered tones, Rebecca grasped Ethan's hand, startled by how hot his skin felt. A fever, possibly indicating his infection, was worsening. "You're burning up. We should get you home," she murmured. "Not until the vote," he said, though sweat now beaded on his forehead. Mayor Thompson took the microphone again. "The council has decided to table the proposed revocation pending consideration of all testimony." The vote was unanimous against closure. Ethan stood up abruptly, swaying slightly. "There's something else you should know," he said, his voice strained. There were murmurs in the crowd. "The condition that young Michael and I share is related to our military service and chemical exposure during deployment," he said, turning to address the mayor. "The same country we served is failing to acknowledge or treat what happened to us. I've spent weeks hiding this truth, ashamed and afraid. But there's no more time for silence." He paused, looking around the room. "Will our hometown follow suit?" Before anyone could respond, Ethan's legs gave way. As darkness closed around him, he heard Rebecca's frantic voice calling his name. The fluorescent lights of Oakwood Memorial's intensive care unit cast harsh shadows across Rebecca's exhausted face as she maintained her vigil at Ethan's bedside. His collapse at the town council meeting had been 36 hours ago. 36 hours of tests and consultations. 36 hours of the steady beep of monitors that now regulated her sense of time more accurately than any clock. Dr. Anderson entered with Dr. Elaine Harper, a neurologist from the Veterans Affairs Hospital 2 hours away. "Rebecca," Dr. Anderson said softly, "Dr. Harper has reviewed Ethan's case." The neurologist stepped forward, her manner direct but compassionate. "Mrs. Mitchell, your husband is experiencing a severe inflammatory response." Rebecca, a medical professional herself, translated the clinical language as it applied to Ethan, lying unnaturally still under crisp hospital sheets. "What's our next step?" she asked, clinging to action over emotion. "The lesions have spread internally, affecting his lymphatic system and showing early signs of neurological involvement," Dr. Harper explained. "We need to start a more aggressive immunosuppressive regimen. And we need to begin plasmapheresis immediately." Plasmapheresis is essentially blood filtering, removing the inflammatory components circulating in his system, she continued. Meanwhile, we explore additional experimental approaches. But Mrs. Mitchell, you should understand that even with successful treatment, there may be lasting neurological consequences. Rebecca pressed for the full truth, and Dr. Harper's demeanor softened considerably. The memory problems your husband has already experienced might worsen or become permanent, she said carefully. The words hit like physical blows. Rebecca thought of Ethan losing his keys 3 times in one morning, forgetting Harold's birthday, struggling to remember the names of shelter residents. Small incidents that now formed a sinister pattern. Will he forget me? She couldn't stop herself from asking. It's difficult to predict exactly how memory might be affected, Dr. Harper said cautiously. But recent memories are generally more vulnerable than deeply established ones. When can we start treatment? Rebecca asked. We're preparing the equipment now. But there's something else. Since Michael Henderson's blood work shows similar markers, I'd like your permission to include him in our treatment protocol. His condition is less severe. Treating him now could prevent the progression we're seeing in Ethan. You should talk to his mother, Rebecca began. We have. She's hesitant, scared about being noticed. That could alert her ex-husband where they are. But she trusts you. Perhaps a word from you would help her understand the importance. In the hospital chapel, Rebecca found Sarah with her hands folded in prayer, Michael dozing against her shoulder, Lucy sitting cross-legged on the floor, quietly coloring. The doctor spoke with you, Rebecca said, sliding into the pew beside them. Sarah nodded, her face haunted. They want to put Michael through some procedure. Filter his blood like he's some kind of experiment. It's a proven treatment for inflammatory disorders, Sarah. Not experimental, Rebecca said gently. I can understand your concern, but Ethan is very sick. I just authorized the same treatment for him. Sarah pulled her sleeping son closer. Michael just has some spots. Those spots represent the early stage of what Ethan has, Rebecca explained softly. We need to act now to prevent Michael from getting worse. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. What if Jason finds us? If his name gets into the VA medical system, he has military connections, friends. He swore he'd kill me if I took the kids. Rebecca immediately understood that Sarah's fear wasn't paranoid delusion but the terror of a woman who had barely escaped alive. Dr. Harper understands the situation, she said. Patient confidentiality would protect you. We can use a pseudonym for the treatment records. I'll personally oversee everything. You promise me he'll be safe? Sarah's voice wavered. Though her own heart was torn between this boy and her husband, both needing her strength, Rebecca reassured her. I promise. After securing Sarah's reluctant consent, she returned to Ethan's room to find Dr. Anderson overseeing the plasmapheresis equipment setup. They were desperately throwing a medical lifeline into uncharted waters, tubes and filters awaiting connection. You should get some rest, Dr. Anderson said in a tone suggesting this wasn't their first conversation about this. The process will take hours. I'm staying, she said reflexively, positioning herself beside Ethan. Dr. Anderson stopped arguing. Rebecca knew the medical procedures as a nurse, but as a wife, she simply knew she couldn't leave. Mayor Thompson appeared in the doorway just as the treatment began, looking uncomfortable in the clinical setting. Mrs. Mitchell, a word if I may, he cleared his throat. The council's vote on the shelter has been postponed. Rebecca stepped into the hallway reluctantly, arms crossed defensively. In light of recent developments. He began nervously. You mean in light of my husband collapsing while defending people you'd rather forget exist? Rebecca's usual diplomacy was stripped away by exhaustion. Thompson looked stricken. That's not really fair. We have to consider property values and business development for the whole town. And those people are part of your town, aren't they? Or are they just an inconvenient eyesore ruining your perfect plans to renovate Main Street? Mrs. Mitchell. It's Nurse Mitchell, Rebecca corrected. She turned to re-enter Ethan's room. And I need to be with my husband right now. Unless you're here to tell me the council has approved permanent zoning for the shelter, we have nothing to discuss. Actually, Thompson's next words stopped her. We thought it might help. We're organizing a blood drive for Ethan and the boy, and a fundraiser for the shelter's required modifications. Rebecca turned to face him, momentarily stunned by this unexpected turn. "My wife was at the meeting," Thompson continued, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Margaret was moved by what she witnessed, by what your husband said before he collapsed. She reminded me that community means everyone, not just property owners and business interests." The olive branch was small but significant. Rebecca nodded, too exhausted for more words, and returned to Ethan's side as the mayor retreated. Hours passed in a blur as the plasmapheresis machine hummed steadily, cleaning Ethan's blood before reintroducing it to his system. Rebecca dozed in the chair beside his bed, waking only when nurses came to check vital signs or adjust medications. When she woke near dawn, Ethan was looking at her, his eyes clearer than they had been in days. "Hey," he said in a scratchy, unfamiliar voice. His gaze went to the medical equipment surrounding him. "What happened?" "Hey yourself," she said, suddenly alert, reaching for his hand. "You collapsed during the town council meeting. How do you feel?" "Like I got hit by a truck." He frowned slightly, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Do you remember anything?" Rebecca described his condition and treatment while closely watching his reactions. "Pieces," he said. "I remember getting up to speak, but everything seems unclear after that." Though his memories of recent events remained jumbled, his intellect appeared intact. "Michael," he asked suddenly, "is he getting treatment too?" "Yes, in pediatrics," Sarah agreed after some persuasion. Ethan's face softened with relief. "Good. He shouldn't have to go through what James went through." He gave her hand a weak squeeze. "I'm sorry, Becca, for hiding things from you." "We'll talk about that when you're stronger," she said, though forgiveness was already beginning to grow in her heart. Dr. Harper arrived for morning rounds, pleased with Ethan's initial response to treatment but cautious about the prognosis. "We'll continue the plasmapheresis for at least 3 more sessions," she said. "For now, just focus on getting better." Ethan asked directly about the neurological consequences. "The immunosuppressants will be long-term, possibly years. Some patients improve as inflammation decreases, while others experience lasting changes." Dr. Harper didn't mince words. "We'll monitor closely with regular cognitive assessments." "Will I be able to return to the shelter?" Ethan asked, despite everything. "Eventually," Dr. Harper hedged, "with safeguards. But your focus should be on recovery now." Rebecca carefully perched on the edge of Ethan's bed. "Mayor Thompson came by. He told me the town is organizing a blood drive for you and Michael, plus a fundraiser for the shelter." Ethan's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Thompson? The same man who called our residents vagrants and addicts at the last town council meeting?" Rebecca smiled slightly. "It seems Lucy's drawing and your collapse made a lasting impression. Harold reports that word has spread, and the shelter has had a steady stream of people bringing food and supplies. Even donations from Jenkins at the health department." Ethan's face briefly brightened with hope, but reality quickly tempered it. "It won't last. People get emotional after a crisis, then return to normal when the drama fades." "Maybe," Rebecca conceded. "But this could be the catalyst. Oakwood needs to see the shelter differently. To see you and your brother's legacy differently." She hesitated before adding, "James should be here." Ethan closed his eyes as grief washed over his features. "He should have had this chance." "He is here through you," Rebecca said, gently stroking his face. "Through everything you've built. Remember, Lucy even drew him as your guardian angel." Before Ethan could respond, there was commotion in the hallway, rapid footsteps and raised voices. Rebecca went to investigate, but Sarah and Michael rushed into the room, Lucy gripping her mother's hand. "Jason, he's downstairs arguing with security," Sarah exclaimed, panic bright in her wild eyes. "Someone at the VA must have told him Michael was here. He found us." Hospital security appeared shortly after. "Mrs. Henderson, we have a problem. A man claiming to be your son's father is demanding to see him. He has custody documents." Rebecca's nursing instincts took over. "Sarah, take the kids into the bathroom and lock the door. I'll handle this." She turned to the security officer as Sarah led the children to safety. "These children are in protective custody pending court review. No one is allowed to see them without proper authorization. The father is subject to a restraining order for domestic violence. The officer hesitated, then nodded. I'll tell him he needs to contact family services. But if he has legal custody, he can follow proper channels. Please call Dr. Harper immediately, Rebecca said firmly. We need to expedite Michael's treatment and discharge. And they can't stay at the shelter if he's looking for them. It's the first place he'll check. Ethan struggled to sit up despite his weakness. They could stay with us. Or we could move them to the women's shelter in Riverdale. Ethan, you're very sick. We can't. Rebecca began. If it can't be the warehouse anymore, it will be our home, he insisted. That's what the shelter was always meant to be. A safe place for those who have nowhere else to go. Security called before Rebecca could respond. Mrs. Mitchell, we need to move quickly if there's a custody situation. Dr. Harper returned with urgent news. Michael will need follow-up care, but I can complete his initial treatment today. Can it be done elsewhere? Another facility? I can arrange a transfer to Riverdale Memorial, Rebecca wondered. They have the equipment. I'll make the calls now. Dr. Harper looked toward the bathroom door, understanding dawning. I see. By evening, a complex plan had been developed. Sarah and Lucy would stay temporarily with the Mitchells, while Harold and other shelter residents worked behind the scenes to help Sarah obtain legal protection from her ex-husband. Michael would be transferred to Riverdale Memorial under an assumed identity for continued treatment. As Rebecca prepared to take Sarah and the kids home, Ethan took her hand. I never meant for our lives to become this complicated, he whispered softly. She leaned down to kiss him gently, knowing the road ahead would be challenging but certain that, for the first time in weeks, they weren't walking it alone. I married a man who couldn't walk past suffering without trying to help, she said. Everything that's happened is who you are. When Rebecca woke the morning after Sarah and her children had moved into the Mitchell house, she heard the unusual sound of children's laughter in the hallway. For a brief moment, confused by sleep deprivation, she forgot that Ethan was still in the hospital, that their small 3-bedroom house now sheltered a traumatized family, and that a potentially dangerous ex-husband was searching the town for his children. Reality returned when she entered the kitchen and saw Lucy sitting at their dining table, contentedly eating pancakes that Sarah had prepared with the focused intensity of someone desperate for normalcy. I hope you don't mind, Sarah said, gesturing to the open pantry. Lucy was hungry, and I wanted to help. Of course not, Rebecca replied, pouring herself coffee and noting the dark circles under Sarah's eyes that mirrored her own. How is Michael feeling this morning? Tired from the treatment, but his fever is gone, Sarah said, carefully flipping another pancake. For the first time in weeks, he hasn't woken up scratching. They were both startled by a knock at the front door. Rebecca told Sarah it was probably Harold, but she moved cautiously to check the peephole before opening the door. Sarah's hand froze mid-motion, panic flashing across her face. Good morning, Rebecca. I thought you might need these. Harold stood on the porch, his weathered face drawn with concern. Recognizing it was unsafe for them to return to retrieve Sarah and the children's belongings from the shelter, he held up a duffel bag, which Rebecca gratefully accepted. Harold's expression darkened. Jason was by the shelter at dawn, demanding to see Sarah and Michael. When I told him they weren't there, he didn't believe me. What happened? Rebecca asked, bringing him inside. He tried to push past me to search the place himself. Harold's voice carried grim satisfaction. Let's just say he discovered that being 70 doesn't mean I've forgotten how to handle myself. Jenkins from the health department witnessed everything and called the police, who took a report. But by the time they arrived, Jason had left. Sarah stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, Lucy now clinging to her leg. He's looking for us, she said, stating the obvious with quiet terror. The police have been notified, Harold assured her. And I also spoke with Pastor Williams at First Methodist. They're sending someone over this afternoon to help you file for emergency protection orders. The church has a legal aid program for domestic situations. Sarah nodded mechanically, but her eyes remained distant, seeing danger in every shadow. The tension was broken by Lucy's innocent concern as she tugged at her mother's hand. Mommy, can I finish my pancakes? They're getting cold. How are things at the shelter? Rebecca drew Harold aside as Sarah forced a shaky smile and guided Lucy back to the table. "Not good," Harold replied, removing his veteran's cap and twisting it in his gnarled hands. After the Jason incident, Jenkins posted an emergency closure notice. Said it was for security reasons, but you know how these bureaucrats work. They'll find any excuse to shut us down. What about the residents? Most found temporary housing with friends or other shelters in Riverdale. The rest? Harold shrugged, a gesture that conveyed harsh realities he wouldn't voice with Lucy nearby. They're sleeping in their cars. Rebecca's phone rang before she could respond. Dr. Anderson was calling with unwelcome news. Ethan's latest blood work is troubling, he said without preamble. Dr. Harper thinks we should take a more aggressive approach. What does that mean exactly? Rebecca moved onto the porch for privacy, dread building in her stomach. The plasmapheresis helped initially, but we're seeing inflammatory markers rising again, he hesitated. We're seeing more evidence of neurological involvement. Rebecca had to grip the porch railing for support. Meaning what? Experimental treatments, higher-dose immunosuppressants. It involves significant risks, he struggled to continue. He had difficulty completing cognitive tests this morning. Struggled to remember recent events, including his admission date and the fact that Michael was being treated for the same condition. I think you should prepare yourself, Rebecca. Dr. Anderson's voice grew softer. Even if we control the physical symptoms, the neurological damage might be irreversible. The screen door creaked as Harold joined her. Rebecca stood motionless on the porch, staring blankly at the familiar neighborhood where she and Ethan had built their life together. The porch swing where they'd spent countless evenings planning their future, a future now dissolving like morning mist. The maple tree they'd planted when they first moved in. The cracked sidewalk where Ethan had chalked welcome messages for neighborhood children. Ethan's worse, Harold said without asking, after one look at her face. Rebecca nodded, not trusting her voice. What do you need? Harold asked calmly, putting his cap back on his head. The straightforward question, free of platitudes or false certainties, broke her composure. I don't know how to do this, she said, tears she'd been suppressing for weeks finally falling. Everything is falling apart at once. The shelter, Sarah and the kids, Ethan's condition. You're not alone in this, Rebecca. None of us are, Harold said, resting a weathered hand on her shoulder. That's what Ethan built. Not just walls and a roof, but a community. And communities take care of their own. A police cruiser pulled up to the house before she could reply. Officer Davies, a former high school classmate of Ethan's, approached with professional concern. Rebecca, I need to speak with Sarah Henderson, he said softly. Inside, Sarah listened with growing fear as the officer recounted this morning's incident at the shelter. I won't lie to you, Davies said gently. We can increase patrols in this area, but our options are limited without an active restraining order. The legal aid attorney is coming this afternoon, Rebecca added. It's a start, but even with emergency provisions, these things take time, Davies said. He looked at the children and lowered his voice. Has Ethan installed security cameras on your property? Jason Henderson has a violent history. I'd feel better knowing you have some protection here. After Davies left, promising to return later, Rebecca had to make another difficult call, this time to her hospital supervisor, requesting more time off to care for Ethan. The administrator was understanding but couldn't guarantee her position would remain open indefinitely. I can hold your spot for 2 weeks, maybe 3, she said, her compassion tempered by bureaucratic reality. But we have patients who need care. Another worry, another thread fraying in the fabric of their lives. That afternoon, Rebecca visited Ethan while Harold stayed with Sarah and the children. The hospital corridor felt longer than ever, each step bringing her closer to a reality she wasn't ready to face. Dr. Harper stopped her outside Ethan's room. You should know that he's having a difficult day. His cognitive problems are more pronounced before you go in. Rebecca nodded, steeling herself. Should I correct him if he's confused? She asked. Gently redirect, but don't challenge him directly. It can cause distress and actually worsen symptoms. When she entered, Ethan was sitting up in bed, staring out the window. At the sound of the door, he turned, his expression briefly brightening before confusion took over. Becca, he started, then paused. Is today Tuesday? I thought you were working Tuesdays now. She settled into the chair beside him, speaking in a light tone. It's Saturday, love. He accepted this with a nod, but uncertainty remained in his eyes. James called to say he was coming to visit this weekend, he said. James had been dead for over 2 years. Rebecca's heart clenched. Not yet, she managed. How are you feeling today? Tired. The doctors keep taking blood. Something about inflammation, he said, reaching for her hand. He frowned slightly. I can't quite remember what it was, but there was a boy with it. Michael, she said softly. He's staying with us for a while, along with his sister and mother. Ethan's confusion deepened. Staying with us? Why would they? The shelter. Something happened there, Rebecca explained, careful not to upset him. It's temporarily closed. Harold has been helping coordinate, but everyone is safe. The lie tasted bitter. Closed, he said, alarm cutting through his confusion. But where is everyone going? Harold and Mrs. Pearson. Everyone is safe, she repeated. Ethan's gaze sharpened with surprising clarity as he relaxed slightly. Becca, I can tell you're not telling me everything, he said. There have been some complications, but nothing we can't handle, she said. You just focus on getting better. This glimpse of her husband, the observant, driven man momentarily visible through his illness, almost broke her composure. What complications? He pressed, suddenly fully present. Rebecca hesitated, weighing Dr. Harper's caution against Ethan's need to know his own situation. But before she could decide, his focus shifted again, the flash of clarity fleeting like a momentary break in storm clouds. He leaned back against the pillows. I'm so tired. Will you stay for a while? Of course, she said, holding his hand until his eyes closed, remaining still until his breathing deepened into sleep. Only then did she allow herself silent tears for the man who had sacrificed everything to help others and might now lose himself in the process. For the shelter's residents scattered to uncertain futures. For Sarah and her children, caught between danger and dependence. And for the community that had just begun to understand Ethan's vision, but perhaps too late to save it. 3 days after Sarah and her children moved into the Mitchell home, Rebecca found herself alone in Ethan's home office, searching for insurance documents. The room remained exactly as Ethan had left it, with a coffee mug still half full on the desk. Outside the window, the October sky darkened with approaching rain, reflecting the gathering shadows around their lives. She opened the desk drawer, pushing aside scattered documents until her fingers brushed a leather-bound notebook she didn't recognize. The computer showed spreadsheets for shelter supplies, and a frayed photograph of him and James in uniform leaned against the lamp. When she opened it, Ethan's distinctive handwriting was visible. The first entry, dated March 15th, over 6 months prior, made Rebecca's breath catch. Quarter-sized lesion on back of shoulder noticed during shower today. Probably nothing. The next entry, March 29th, 2 weeks later, 3 new spots, larger and more painful than those James had toward the end. Scheduling appointment with Dr. Anderson. Her hands trembled slightly. Haven't told Becca yet. She doesn't need another worry. Rebecca continued reading, page after page documenting Ethan's private struggle with mounting fear as his symptoms progressed, his early consultations with the doctor, his research into his brother's medical records, his desperate attempts to maintain the shelter despite his declining health. May 2nd, finding it harder to concentrate. Forgot Harold's birthday. Rebecca noticed, but I blamed it on stress. May 18th, how long before I can no longer hide this? James was trying to tell me something important in my dream last night, but I couldn't understand him. The shelter needs a backup plan. The last entry, made just before their June 5th ER visit. If something happens to me, the residents will have nowhere to go. Found architect plans for a permanent shelter facility in James's old footlocker. He had been developing these before his illness. The plans include professional drawings, cost estimates. He was always 2 steps ahead of me. Even though I thought I was carrying on his dream, all this time he was planning the future. If I can't continue, Rebecca will know what to do with these. She never wanted the shelter, but now she understands. She will continue if I cannot. Rebecca closed the journal, overwhelmed by the realization that Ethan had been preparing for the worst for months while she remained unaware. That James's vision, a blueprint for the future Ethan had been trying to secure, was somewhere in their house. She heard a gentle knock and looked up to see Harold standing in the doorway, his face solemn. "Rebecca, you need to come downstairs," he said. Harold introduced her to Colonel Frank Wilson in the living room, an older man with carefully combed white hair, military-bearing evident despite his age, wearing a crisp button-down shirt. "Mrs. Mitchell, I wish we were meeting under better circumstances," the colonel said, extending his hand. "I was Harold's commanding officer in Vietnam. When I heard about Ethan, I drove down from Riverdale." Harold added, "Colonel Wilson is on the Veterans Affairs Medical Advisory Board. He brought someone with him." The colonel gestured to a middle-aged man who had been examining family portraits on the mantel. Dr. Lawrence Green, former Army Medical Corps, now specializing in exposure-related conditions in veterans. Dr. Green stepped forward. "Mrs. Mitchell, I've reviewed the files Dr. Harper forwarded to me. Your husband's case is similar to others I've treated, veterans exposed to specific chemicals during specialized operations." A faint hope flickered. "Can you help him?" "Possibly. I've developed protocols that have shown good results in cases like this. But I need to conduct a quick in-person assessment. The neurological symptoms suggest our window of opportunity is closing." Rebecca's nursing background prompted detailed questions about treatment specifics, risks, and success rates. Dr. Green's answers were direct and honest. No guarantees, significant risks, but better odds than conventional approaches. Suspicion dampened her initial optimism. Why hasn't the VA offered these treatments before? Colonel Wilson cleared his throat. "Politics, Mrs. Mitchell. These treatments acknowledge exposure incidents that officially never occurred during classified missions. It's easier for the government to categorize cases like your husband's as unrelated diseases than to admit clear causality." The injustice reignited anger Rebecca had been holding inside for weeks. Dr. Green interrupted firmly, "I left the Army Medical Corps because I can do more good working independently, with doctors like Dr. Harper who are willing to bypass bureaucracy for their patients' sake." Rebecca's phone rang with surprising news from Dr. Anderson. Ethan had experienced what he called a window of clarity, during which his cognitive function temporarily improved. "We should go immediately," Dr. Green said after she explained that Ethan was asking for her and specifically for James's footlocker from the attic. These neurological recovery periods are often brief but offer the best chance for therapeutic response. At the hospital, they found Ethan sitting up, alert in a way he hadn't been in days, his expression brightening at the sight of Rebecca but puzzled by her companions. "Harold, what are you doing here?" he asked, awareness slowly returning to him. Colonel Wilson replied kindly, "Hello, son." Dr. Green introduced himself and explained his specialization, examining Ethan closely for comprehension. "Harold thought I might be able to help," Dr. Green said. Ethan asked specific questions about the proposed treatment, his sharp attention temporarily returned in a way that amazed Rebecca. The procedure combines multiple approaches: targeted immunotherapy, neurological pathway protection, and inflammatory response modulation, Dr. Green explained. "But the side effects can be severe. The risks are significant. Worse than losing my mind piece by piece?" Ethan asked plainly. "If your system reacts badly to the treatment, it could accelerate cognitive deterioration," Dr. Green acknowledged. Ethan absorbed this, then turned to Rebecca. "You found James's footlocker?" "I just learned about it in your journal," she said, gripping his hand. "It's important, Becca. The plans for the future. I promise I'll find it." Ethan's focus was clearly waning, slipping away like sand through fingers. He saw it so clearly. "The neurological symptoms are following predicted patterns," Dr. Green observed this fluctuation with professional interest. "We should begin treatment immediately while he still has these moments of clarity." Rebecca hesitated. "I need to consult with Doctors Anderson and Harper first." "Naturally. But remember, time is not on our side." After Dr. Green left to confer with the other doctors, Colonel Wilson approached Ethan's bedside. "I want you to know that what happened during Operation Sandstone wasn't your fault, Mitchell," he said formally. "You performed your duty excellently under impossible circumstances." Ethan tensed. "That mission is still classified, sir." The colonel's voice softened. "Not to me, son. I personally reviewed all after-action reports," he looked between Harold and them, "including your repeated requests for follow-up testing when symptoms began appearing in your unit members. Tests that were denied due to budget constraints. There's something you should understand," Colonel Wilson continued. "You never talked about Operation Sandstone because you were ordered not to, just as you were ordered not to discuss certain operations during our time in Vietnam." Harold looked between them with growing comprehension. "But silence has served no one," the colonel interrupted. "Not the affected veterans, not their families, not even the military itself. I'm gathering testimony from affected service members, building a case that can't be ignored or buried in bureaucracy." He placed a small recording device on the bedside table. "James tried that route." Ethan's face darkened with memory. "No one listened. Times have changed. We have new congressional allies now, medical documentation, patterns too consistent to ignore." The colonel's determination was clear. "Your brother's voice was alone. Yours won't be." Rebecca observed her husband wrestling with this opportunity. Years of conditioned silence weighed against the chance to reveal long-suppressed truths. Before he could decide, Dr. Harper, Dr. Anderson, and Dr. Green entered, their faces showing they had reached an agreement. "Given the current rate of progression, we want to move forward with Dr. Green's protocol," Dr. Harper announced. "The potential benefits outweigh the risks." Treatment preparations began immediately, creating a flurry of activity that momentarily overshadowed other concerns. Reluctantly, Sarah called to explain she would be staying at the hospital tonight. "There's been a development with Jason," Officer Davies had arrived. "Based on what happened at the shelter, they've granted a temporary restraining order," she told Rebecca over the phone. "But they still can't locate him." "Harold is coming back shortly," Rebecca rubbed her temples, this new concern vying for space in her overburdened mind. "I made copies of the important pages from Ethan's notebook." She pressed folded papers into Harold's palm when she found him waiting to say goodbye. "The entry about James's shelter plans. Can you help me locate that footlocker when you get back to the house?" A slight smile crossed Harold's weathered face. "Colonel Wilson is staying in town for a few days. He's arranging a meeting with Mayor Thompson tomorrow. Something about federal grants for veteran housing initiatives. It seems your husband's collapse at the council meeting shook loose more than just local sympathy." When Harold left, Rebecca returned to find Ethan already connected to Infor, administering the first components of Dr. Green's protocol. His eyes were becoming unfocused as the medication took effect, his clarity ebbing once more. "Stay with me," he said in a low voice. "Always," she replied, slipping into the chair beside him. As night fell and hospital sounds faded to background whispers, she continued her vigil. At midnight, Ethan woke briefly, conscious despite the drugs in his system. "Becca," he murmured, "if this doesn't work—" "We're not having that conversation," she interrupted. "We have to." His voice grew urgent. "I can't let the shelter die with me." "You'll build it again yourself," she said firmly. "You'll do it," he said. James understood that too many people depend on it. That's why he prepared those plans for a permanent facility. Properly zoned, with medical services on site. "Promise me you'll find a way. Not just for James or me, but for Harold, Sarah, Lucy, Michael, and everyone else who needs a safe place." His hand found hers in the darkness. "When you're better," she began. "If I'm not." Running the shelter had been Ethan's passion, his calling, his atonement for not saving his brother. She had supported him because she loved him, not because she shared his vision. The request hung between them, not just as a promise but as a possible future Rebecca had never imagined for herself. Yet the shelter was no longer just Ethan's mission. It was a living entity they had created together, as essential and necessary as the hospital where she worked. "I promise," she said finally. "Whatever happens, the shelter will continue." Somewhere in these frantic weeks, between dressing wounds and fighting bureaucracy, between sheltering strangers and witnessing the community's slow awakening, something had changed inside her. "You always said James would help you," Ethan murmured, leaning back into sleep. His features softened, tension visibly leaving his body. Autumn painted oakwood in vibrant hues as November arrived. Outside the window, the first light of dawn illuminated the eastern sky, a reminder that even the darkest nights eventually give way to morning. Rebecca sat motionless in the quiet room as Ethan's breathing deepened, the weight of his faith in her both a blessing and a burden. 1 year later, the bronze plaque reading, "The Mitchell Brothers Veterans and Family Support Center," was illuminated by morning light as Rebecca Mitchell stood at the large picture window of the newly completed Pine Street Community Center. She watched volunteers setting up chairs for the day's dedication ceremony, the transformation from her darkest hour to this moment of hope still feeling surreal. A young assistant approached. Mrs. Mitchell, the mayor arrived early and wanted a moment before the ceremony. She nodded, smoothing her navy dress before heading to the reception area where Mayor Thompson waited, looking more comfortable than she'd ever seen him. "When we approved the zoning amendment, we had no idea how magnificent the place would look," he said warmly, the formality of their earlier encounters long abandoned. "Thank you, Robert," she took his outstretched hand. "But I think your wife should get most of the credit for the design elements." "Margaret does have a great eye," he agreed, pointing toward the entrance where Margaret Thompson was cheerfully directing volunteers with efficient grace. "Speaking of that, she wanted me to tell you the memorial garden was finished." Rebecca's throat tightened with emotion. "I'll make sure he sees it before everyone arrives." "The landscapers planted those blue hydrangeas Ethan requested this morning," Thompson added. In contrast to the bustling main areas of the community center, the medical wing maintained hospital-like serenity. Soft lighting, muted colors, and the faint antiseptic scent that had become so familiar over the past year. As the mayor went to greet other early arrivals, Rebecca slipped down the quiet hallway toward the medical wing, pausing at the nurse's station where Elena, a former colleague from Oakwood Memorial, was reviewing patient charts. "Good morning," Elena said with a warm smile. "How is he today?" Rebecca asked the daily question that still carried weight after months of stability. "Dr. Harper stopped by for a quick evaluation," Elena replied. "Said he's wonderfully present today. He's been dressed and ready since 7, looking through old photographs." Rebecca felt a wave of relief. He's been anticipating this day. Ethan's room was at the end of the hall, bright and spacious with windows overlooking the memorial garden. He sat in his favorite armchair, a leather-bound album open on his lap, wearing the new suit she'd helped him choose for today's ceremony. The good days had become more frequent in recent months, but each one still felt like a precious gift, never taken for granted. His smile was warm and immediate as he looked up at her entrance. "There's my beautiful wife." A year of aggressive treatment following Dr. Green's protocol had stopped Ethan's condition from worsening. On good days like today, Ethan was nearly fully himself, alert, engaged, with only occasional lapses in recent memory. The neurological damage had proved more stubborn, creating a new reality they had gradually learned to navigate together. The physical symptoms had subsided, the lesions had healed, leaving only faint circular scars as reminders. "You look very handsome," Rebecca said, adjusting his tie. "How are you feeling about today?" "Nervous," he admitted. On bad days, confusion reigned and the present slipped away like water through cupped hands, leaving him adrift in fragments of the past. "I keep worrying I'll forget what I'm supposed to say, that I'll disappoint everyone." "Even if you forget the exact words, everyone knows your heart," she assured him. "That's what matters." "I've been looking at these to help me remember," Ethan said, gesturing to the album. "You and me on our wedding day. James and me at basic training." He pointed to the pictures. "You were so beautiful. You still are." His finger traced her youthful face in the photograph. Rebecca sat beside him, leaning against his shoulder as they turned pages. "Do you remember when this one was taken?" she asked, pointing to a picture of them standing in front of the warehouse that had once housed the original shelter. "Harold took it on opening day," Ethan said, his face lighting up. "It was raining, and we were